The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back for another week of podcasting excellence here on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio, and we're going to be talking professional wrestling again for the second weekend in a row. This week, we're going to talk, for the most part, about the best of the rest of WrestleMania weekend. We talked about WrestleMania. We've got 2 podcasts dedicated to it. If you haven't checked those out, you can go back and check those out. This is basically going to cover everything else that happened in and around WrestleMania weekend. Some of it good, some of it not so good, but we'll get to all of it on this week's podcast. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going, man. There is just never an off season with wrestling.
It's been a busy few days, and it kind of feels like time to take a breath and kind of get away from pro wrestling. We're going to talk about it tonight, but at least a little bit of a break before we get back into it. It's only a few weeks away till the next premium live event for WWE. Joining us in the studio again this weekend is Rachel. Rachel, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm glad to be here tonight.
We got some wrestling news to talk about. Chris taking the week off, and I say taking the week off. I'm sure he's plenty busy with the wife and kids, but going to take a break from the podcast this week. He'll be back with us tomorrow for Music Monday, so make sure you check that out. Coming up tomorrow, we look at the best music releases from March the 29th. But this week we're talking best of the rest, but we have to start with the worst before we can get to the best of the rest. And that is the decision by AEW to air the footage from All In that included altercation in the back between CM Punk and Jack Perry. It led to Perry getting suspended and then exiled and presumably going to be brought back. Punk getting fired and going to WWE and now is part of this red hot juggernaut that is World Wrestling Entertainment. And basically, they tease this as part of a storyline with the Bucks and FTR, and the video that was shown basically showed exactly what CM Punk said it would show. In fact, Ariel Helwani, before he got copyright struck, actually had a side-by-side with the podcast audio and the video, and they were pretty much even. It allowed AEW to get back above 800,000 in viewership. The quarter hour in particular that had that video bumped up to 880,000 before they dropped off all the way down to 723,000 for the final quarter hour, which was Samoa Joe versus Dustin Rhodes in the aftermath. The real question is going to be, obviously, and this is the question we don't know the answer to at this point, is what is the long-term effects? There are a lot of AEW people like Dave Meltzer, like Brian Alvarez, that were not real pleased with the decision to do this. There were obviously AEW fans that are going to defend AEW no matter what, but at least to the outsider, to someone who's not a diehard, it really made the company look minor league and is exactly what they should not be trying to do a week or two after Adam Copeland goes out there and gives the big rah-rah speech about, you know, we're just having a good time and we're looking to move forward and do these cool things. And then you kind of take this big step back and get over somebody who's not on your program and in fact is on the program of your competition. So just a bizarre situation. We'll let Mike take the first stab at it. We're not going to talk about this too long, but again, just an odd situation that I just wonder what the long-term ramifications are going to be.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that CM Punk Jack Perry match that they're going to have next week. Oh, wait, they're not, because CM Punk works for the other company. Well, that's troubling. I also think, like, this is kind of not off topic, but a little out there. Like, you ever see, like, get freaked out by a spider? And then when you tell people about it later, you exaggerate the size of it because, you know, you want it to seem more menacing than it really was. I think if you're going to use a phrase like fear for your life, you don't show people what made you fear for your life unless it's something terrifying. And man, there wasn't anything in that video that would have scared me a whole lot, to be honest.
I think one of the things I read that seemed the most true is that there was more real life physicality in some of the angles that WWE has run over the past few weeks, like The Rock beating Cody from pillar to post. There's more physicality in that angle, which is a work, than there was in this shoot incident backstage, which is kind of telling in a way. Rachel, you get your thoughts on it since you're here in studio with us this week about just the whole thing.
I mean, it just made CM Punk look good. I mean, the CM Punk fans weren't going to be angry at him for any of it. They were going to be excited about it. It was exactly what he said it was. And it made, like you said, AEW just kind of look petty. I don't think it'll help them in the long run at all. I think it was just one of those like reactions, like everyone wanted to kind of see it. So they turned it on. But then, like you said, like by the end of the show, the numbers had gone down pretty handily. Again, it just made CM Punk look like he was the hero of the story.
And of course, he got chants in the arena, which is certainly not the reaction they want.
I think the other thing that gets me, and I mentioned it before when this first came out on Wednesday, there are plenty of ex-WWE people in this company who have had to suffer the brunt of an angry fan base chanting CM Punk when there's no way he can show up. Why didn't any of them say, hey, we don't want to do this? Because you have no idea how fanatical the CM Punk fan base is. And once you give them a reason to, they will bury your show in CM Punk chants endlessly.
And the crazy thing is it's happening in a crowd that's got 3,000 people in it.
Yeah.
It's not even the 9 to 10,000 that WWE was drawing during all those times where they were getting their show hijacked by CM Punk chants. This is presumably the most diehard AEW people that are still showing up to their weekly TV, and they still, on a moment's notice, will turn and chant CM Punk. And don't think that's what you want. Although I will say my favorite conspiracy theory from the whole week was it almost makes it look more like Punk and Jack Perry actually worked together on this. So because Punk wanted to leave and they basically staged the whole thing so Punk would get fired and be able to go back to WWE, and Jack Perry in the end, his merch sales are moving. So clearly he's drawing maybe the right kind of attention to himself. I think it's AEW, it's the Bucks, and maybe by association FTR that's going to be the most hurt by this because they're the ones that are going to be getting the CM Punk chants when he's nowhere around.
Well, didn't originally CM Punk have a favorable opinion of Jack Perry? I mean, isn't there that quote floating around, something like, if you have a problem with him, like you're the problem or something to that effect?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there's not more to it. But the only thing I can say positively before we move on is this could very well be the last chance that Tony Khan has to rally the base, if you will, to get, that us against the world mentality. It's not the best way to go about it, obviously, but all you can do now is hope that some of those people that came and tuned in and got invested, because obviously people were invested online, come back and watch your next Dynamite, watch your next pay-per-view. Because if it doesn't work, if they're down into low 7s or even high 6s next week, then it's really going to start looking bad for their next TV deal, which is coming up very soon. And if you're starting to have head-to-head with NXT as far as ratings, they're going to look and say, well, CW paid X amount of dollars for NXT. Why should we pay any more than that for AEW? It's the same audience. So we'll see. I don't want to give it too much oxygen, obviously, because I think most of it has been said by people in the industry. I encourage you to, I know Eric Bischoff just did a live video. Check that out. Bully Ray had a really good take and really reasonable take last night on Busted Open After Dark. So check those out. Really good perspectives. And again, these are from guys that are not actively rooting against AEW. They want them to succeed, but sometimes you just get in your own way, and we'll see how that works out. But enough about AEW. Let's move on to NXT.
A successful company.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stand and Deliver, which always delivered, and it certainly did again, although certainly some interesting results that may not be the end of things for a couple of people. Just run down the results real quick, and then I'll just kind of throw it to each of you for general thoughts on the event, or if there's any one specific match you want to get to specifically. In the pre-show, Joe Gacy defeated Shawn Spears. The match went 9 minutes plus and involved Ridge Holland hitting Joe Gacy with a chair prior to the match. So we've got some sort of angle going on there. Baron Corbin and Braun Breaker defended their tag titles against Axiom and Nathan Frazer in 11 minutes and 22 seconds, only to turn around and drop them on NXT television on Tuesday in Braun Breaker's last match on the brand. Obafemi won a really great match against Dijak and Josh Briggs for the North American Championship. Fallon Hennig, Kalani Jordan, and Thea Hale defeated Izzy Dame, JC Jane, and Kiana James in what was a fun 6-woman tag match. Roxanne Perez defeated Lyra Valkyria by submission to regain the NXT Women's Championship. And Ilya Dragunov was able to retain his title, defeating Tony D'Angelo. And then in the main event, Trick Williams won a short match, although it did go almost 15 minutes. It really didn't feel like it got out of second gear against Carmelo Hayes, but we now know those two will be fighting again on NXT television this coming week in a cage match. And then Trick Williams in 2 weeks will get Ilya Dragunov in a Trick Williams doesn't beat Dragunov. He will have to leave NXT. So certainly a lot of great, really interesting things going on. We'll start with Rachel this time. Rachel, what jumped out at you? Is there any specific match or just the event in general?
I mean, the events are always fantastic all around, but I was amazed at the North American Championship match. When I was watching it, I started looking up like the stats on each guy. Like Dijak is like 36, he's the oldest, but they're all like about the same height. And they're all like way over. I mean, Obafemi's the shortest at 6'4", and they're all almost 300 pounds, and they're moving around. I mean, there was a move where Dijak went over the ref to hit Briggs. They just put on an amazing match, and sometimes I don't expect it, but it was just my favorite match probably on the card.
I think it was one of the better matches the whole weekend, and that's even with a great Wrestlemania that we talked about on our last podcast. But yeah, that was a really solid match. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, there was nothing wrong with any of the matches on the card. I think the ones that stood out the most were the tag team title match and the triple threat for the North American title. Wolf Dogs, I would love to see them continue on. And Braun Breaker moving the ring as he ran off the ropes. I mentioned it live. I've never seen someone who looks impressive just running off the ropes, but Breaker does, and it's kind of frightening. Otherwise, the North American title match, all three of those guys are great. I think this was a really good showing for Briggs, who hasn't had that same opportunity to kind of show out like Femi and Dijak have. Dijak's Canadian Destroyer, anytime a dude of his stature can pull off one of those is ridiculous. The Tower of Doom spot where Femi did like the Death Valley Driver and Fall Away Slam simultaneously on both guys was just ridiculous. I thought the six-woman tag match was actually better than the one on Mania. I think not that any of the participants in either match aren't talented, but man, the talent that NXT has right now is just otherworldly. And I think, not to bring up negative things again, but it's like, I think that's why Triple H can say, if we don't think you want to work hard enough, we don't want you here, because we can just bring up these collegiate athletes, train them what they need to know, and next thing you know, you got an Obafemi on your hands.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think the 6-woman match on NXT was just put together better, I think. I think it was a much better way to spotlight kind of everybody in the match, and everybody kind of had that moment, which I thought was really good. You talk about women's talent. A couple other notes that came out of this weekend with NXT. Number one, the announcement of a mid-card title. They're going to add an NXT Women's North American Championship, and they haven't yet said how they're going to go about doing that, but I imagine we'll be hearing about that over the next few weeks on NXT television. The other was the return of the person sitting at ringside, and it was Julia, of course, one of the most sought after women's wrestlers in the world. Of course, she just recently left World of Stardom, is going to be spending a little bit of time working with Rossi Ogawa and whatever his new promotion is going to be. Whether there's any tie to WWE there, I think is still very much up in the air. But Julia is somebody that's going to come in and turn heads really right away. And she was there at the ring. And I saw the story from Tokyo Sports that she kind of had a perplexed look on her face. And it turned out she didn't know she was on camera. And she said, I wish I could do it again, because she was just kind of blown away that people were cheering for her. But she's somebody that I think if people haven't checked out her work, you definitely need to. It's another Joshi wrestler coming in that works a strong style, very physical, and I think just adds, again, the right mix between your athletes that you can bring in and these independent wrestlers who are wanting to come in and be a superstar and be a mega star, and they've decided to go the WWE route. That brings up the other point from the weekend. Of course, the news that Jacob Fatu is on his way to WWE, and I watched some of the videos of his moveset, and it's like ridiculous. Like, this dude is incredibly athletic for his size, and it's starting to seem like maybe they're not getting the biggest known people like the Will Ospreays, the Kazuchika Okadas, but they're getting these really talented independent workers that are coming in that just seem to be a perfect fit. Mike, your thoughts on kind of all that?
Yeah, I agree. WWE's in this great position right now where there's no one that they absolutely need. So they can be as selective as they want to be. And someone like a Jacob Fatu, just dude's ridiculous for his size. One other thing I did kind of want to point out, though, is kind of our thoughts about the Stand and Deliver card and kind of how some of the matches didn't go maybe the way we thought they did. And it makes you wonder, actually, having now seen the following episode of Weekly NXT, Is that just how they're going to book Stand and Deliver moving forward, where maybe you don't see the culmination of feuds because they want these wrestlers to have their last match at the Performance Center to give them the send-off in front of the faithful crowd?
I think there's certainly a good possibility. I think also if it looks like that the draft is going to settle in to the end of April going forward, you don't really want them off television for 3 weeks to have people kind of forget about them. So this is an opportunity. Obviously, like in Breaker's case, he's already been drafted, so he can show up. If in other cases where you're moving people up, this does give them a chance to kind of have that send-off moment. And I think that says a lot for that relationship with the Performance Center and the crowd there, even though sometimes they're a little difficult to love because of the way they hijack shows. Overall, I think it's been a really good environment, and it was good to see he was able to kind of get that moment with that crowd. Rachel, your thoughts on all that?
I mean, I agree. I'm glad that, because I was kind of surprised initially that they kept the titles at NXT TakeOver or the Stand and Deliver. But then obviously it made perfect sense Tuesday night when they lost them. And then brought in Final Testament to start feuding as well, which is surprising and kind of exciting. But having Braun get his moment, because he's been such a staple the last year or two at NXT, and he just seems like he's excited to be there. Like Mike said, him running is amazing. He's just so athletic, and he's going to do great things on SmackDown. Yeah,
and I think the last point on NXT before we take a break is, for so many years, when you had that wrestler that had that last moment in NXT, you kind of felt bad for them. Like, man, now
what?
Now they're moving up. Is Vince going to know what to do with them? Is Vince going to change their gimmick and all this other stuff? Now it's like you're actually excited. Like, hey, if they're going up, there's a plan. Like, they're going to go and make the best version of themselves on the main roster. Speaking of which, one last thing on NXT, I lied. It was great seeing Ivar.
He looked normal.
Ivar dressed like a normal human being and not in the gimmick basically of the Viking. And I just wonder if we're going to get back to, what made War Machine this great tag team, and not so much about the Viking gimmick, but about just two dudes that are big and athletic, and they're going to just kick people's butt and then kind of get back to that.
Yeah, I think the Viking thing should really be kind of the subplot, not the whole presentation. War Machine was great on the indies. I really enjoyed them, and you kind of want to see that full product being brought back.
So definitely interested in seeing Obafemi versus Ivar. That's going to make for a great match somewhere down the road. But that was NXT Stand and Deliver. Definitely check that out. It was a great way to kind of kick things off as far as the WWE portion of WrestleMania weekend. But there were a lot of other wrestling matches over WrestleMania weekend. Of course, there was the Hall of Fame on Friday night as well. We'll touch on all those things when we come back on the other side of this time out here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, another weekend of wrestling. We're talking about the best of the rest of WrestleMania weekend this week. Matt, Mike, and Rachel in the studio this week. Chris taking the week off. He'll be back with us on Monday, tomorrow. And don't forget, coming up tomorrow, we have Music Mondays with the music from March the 29th. So make sure you check that out at nerdcastempire.com or wherever you get your podcast. Don't forget to check out our store on our website at nerdcastempire.com/store. 1 week from tonight will be episode number 50 of the Nerdcast Empire. How it has gone so fast, it's hard to believe we are already going to be recording our 50th episode. And for our 50th episode, we're going to be giving you 5 of our favorite anime opens of all time, and certainly excited about that. We've got way more than 5. We're going to try to limit it to 5 each and kind of talk about the artist and the song and maybe even the show that it comes from, kind of give you the full details on why they're among our favorite anime opens of all time. That will be next week on the Nerdcast Empire. And then, of course, the following day will be another episode of Music Monday, and we'll be into April. I can't remember exactly what the date is, but it's that first week in April. And Mike has already started work on that, of course, as he puts all the lists together. But that'll be coming up a week from Monday as we head into April with new releases on the Nerdcast Empire. But let's talk briefly about the Hall of Fame. It was on Friday night. Of course, they honored the Hall of Fame inductees again on Sunday at WrestleMania, but specifically the Paul Heyman induction speech, which kind of stole the show. It was the opening induction speech. I have a feeling if they ever go back and create an edit of the episode, like to condense it for time, they may move it to the end because it really is kind of the showstopper. But clearly a guy who feels very grateful for everything he's been able to do but also you just see like this is a guy that's nowhere near walking away from the industry. This guy's got the same fire as that dude that snuck into Madison Square Garden to take photos all those years ago. We'll start with Rachel. Your thoughts on Heyman and anything else from the Hall of Fame induction that stood out to you?
I mean, I would have said before that The Undertaker's speech was the all-time best, but Paul Heyman's, I think, definitely overtook that. I like seeing him acknowledge Triple H, especially because Triple H literally has like steered the ship out of some chaos after everything with Vince McMahon. Triple H really has taken the product to new levels. You can tell everyone loves and respects Paul as a person, as an individual or a human being, as a coworker. I've always said I need a Paul Heyman in my life to, announce things for me. But it was very touching and very well deserved. Yeah, no question about it. Great to see so many former ECW legends in attendance as well. And even coming out to the ECW music, which I thought was a nice touch. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for anyone kind of within our age group, there's just a certain coolness about Paul Heyman for his ECW that maybe newer fans don't really see the same way. They just see him as the creative guy in WWE that people like. It's crazy to think that he's lasted this long within the WWE system, especially under Vince. I can't imagine those two guys have the kind of personalities that gel well together. Meanwhile, given what he said about Paul Levesque, you get the feeling we're going to have the chains totally off of Heyman moving forward, especially after this Bloodline story. And what we see from him creatively could just be even more amazing than what we've already gotten. And I think the things that you're starting to find out more that you didn't know, the fact he's been working with so many of the talents from NXT or new talents in the main roster that come to him for advice. And that's priceless to have somebody that's back there that can give that kind of advice, and the fact that the talent are willing to ask for that advice and actually take it to heart, I think is huge. And Heyman, a guy that kind of like a cockroach somehow has survived the disaster that was Vince McMahon, probably was smart enough to know when to push for something and when to hide out and stay away from Vince. But like you said, with Triple H in charge, you just can't help but think we're going to get an amazing time ahead. It's already started, but I have a feeling the WWE is going to go to new heights because of the creative talent and freedom that they have. And certainly check out the Hall of Fame if you haven't already. Maybe also underrated is just his talent scouting ability. When you think of the people he associated himself with as far back as The Undertaker, Mark Calloway, or Steve Austin or Rick Rude, like these people that he put around him, it's like the guy clearly knows what's up. And, we shouldn't mention Lesnar apparently nowadays, but that's another guy. It's just the guy clearly knows what's up. There aren't many people with that level of skill as far as knowing who the star should be. I mean, WWE right now has a guy in Paul Heyman and a guy in William Regal, who's another outstanding talent scout and evidently was heavily involved in the recruitment of Julia. It's just between those two guys, like you could pretty much leave all your talent scouting to those two and you're going to put together an amazing roster. I think WWE is very fortunate to have those two guys on their side and working for their company. But a great event. Again, you can check out the Hall of Fame on Peacock. That's where it aired. And I'm sure at some point there'll probably be some sort of condensed version as well online. But of course, we've talked about all the big brand wrestling, but there was a lot of small brand wrestling as well. WrestleMania weekend is basically a chance for GCW Collective to run about a dozen shows. There were other companies that ran shows kind of outside, I think part of like WrestleCon that ran shows. There was probably, I don't know, between 15 and 20 shows in the Philadelphia area, maybe more that we didn't even know about. And Mike got to watch a lot more of it than I did. I just wanted to call out a couple of matches I did get to watch and then kind of get Mike's thoughts. What I got to see of Bloodsport was outstanding as usual. I think that is such a unique gimmick that Josh Barnett has put together. I think it's something that kind of sporadically in those situations, a worked shoot fight, I think really does work. The Shayna Baszler against Masha Slamovich, I thought was really excellent. And it was a great way for Baszler to kind of show off what she can do. And I think maybe, hopefully somebody in WWE will see what she can do and kind of run with that. Also saw a little bit of one of the GCW shows that involved Danhausen and a cup of teeth and Maki Ito and Nick Gage and somebody else that I can't remember, which it was a total mess of a disaster. But again, you take the good with the bad with the collective shows, and
That was definitely one of them. But also the Yoshihiko match on that same card, I think. I can't remember who Yoshihiko was wrestling. If you don't know what Yoshihiko is, look that up. But an amazing performance. Basically one person wrestling themselves for the entire match. But definitely interesting wrestling weekend. Mike, I know you saw a lot more of it than I did. What stood out to you?
Yeah, just real quickly. I think it was Joey Janela's Spring Break where we had the Nick Gage tag match against Danhausen. It was Nick Gage and Maki Ito versus Danhausen and Ram Kaicho. I mean, I'm not a Nick Gage guy. I understand that crowd really loves it. And I think if you're interested in looking into indie wrestling, I think part of you kind of has to see that just to kind of know if it's something you like or not.
Yeah.
It's not for me, but it's certainly a highlight of the weekend. For me, I like any of the unique stuff that's completely out, just or kind of out there that maybe I don't want to see on my WWE product every week, but in this environment, it works perfectly. Talking about Bloodsport, the names they had on the card this time around were really good. I mean, you had Nick Nemeth beating Mike Bailey, which Mike Bailey was on every card this weekend, as well as Masha Slamovich.
You saw a lot of them this week.
Yeah, and both are really talented. I think I may have been a bit overexposed to both of them, but there's no question they're good at what they do. Charlie Dempsey being there as well was really cool. Anytime you have a card with Minoru Suzuki, Timothy Thatcher, Axel Tischer, not a bad thing either. I thought Marina Shafir looked way more in her element in the Bloodsport ring than she does in a wrestling ring typically. So that was kind of cool to see. And then this is actually, I think, the first time I've seen Josh Barnett in a fight. So him beating Johnny Bloodsport was good to see as well. Probably my favorite wrestling that was non-WWE of the weekend was the DDT show. DDT Goes Philadelphia. You had Cheaton defeating Dan the Dad, which for those of you who don't know, like I didn't know going into the weekend, Cheaton is this giant mascot and has this really huge head, and everything about it was just stupid but amazing. After that match, actually, Cheaton got attacked by Chris Brooks, who apparently hates mascots, and was saved by Yoshihiko, who, that's another story altogether, is basically like this stuffed blow-up doll that people wrestle with, like you mentioned. That also comes down to the Ministry Undertaker theme, which is even more hilarious. But yeah, then Yoshihiko went on to defeat Kazuki Hirata, which was a really entertaining match, just to see the one guy kind of doing all the work himself to make it look like he's getting, put in like a Fujiwara arm bar and, getting German suplexed by this doll. I don't want that on my serious product, but in this environment, it's tremendous. And moving on to like Joey Janela Spring Break. It's weird watching Blake Christian versus Joey Janela, which was an entertaining match. Mm-hmm. Like Blake Christian, the dude is just so indie wrestling. Like it's hard to imagine that he actually was with WWE at one point in time. Like super entertaining, but you kind of felt like that's where he's meant to be. Also want to call out the Wrestling Revolver X House of Glory event that had Alex Shelley defeating Mike Santana and Mustafa Ali defeating Amazing Red, which maybe not the greatest matches, but always cool when you get to see Mustafa Ali wrestle kind of a Impact Ring of Honor legend that Amazing Red was. The dude was so influential in that kind of X Division wrestling style.
Yeah, he influenced so many people that wrestle that way. I know there was another wrestler that you had mentioned that you thought when you got a chance to see them, had a good weekend, was Mao, I believe.
Yeah, he was on a couple of the cards I saw. He was definitely entertaining, constantly flipping people off, but his in-ring work was really cool. I'd like to see more of his work.
Yeah, I think I got to see one of his matches, and it was pretty entertaining. There's no question about that. I did not get a chance to watch the cluster.
Nor did I.
Evidently, there were 77 people booked for the cluster that involved like Cheaton, and I think Yoshihiko was in it. I can't remember who ended up winning. I'm not sure it's even important. I could look it up here real quick.
My mind is just blown by everything I just heard.
Oh, yeah, it is something.
Microman was the winner.
Seriously?
I am serious.
Was that the event where Nick Gage was like cutting Yoshihiko's head?
Yes.
I saw that.
Yes, indeed. Microman won the cluster battle royal. They say over 80 people competed. So they said like 2 or 3 of the people were just dudes in masks. Like they're not even sure they were pro wrestlers. They just ended up in the match.
I imagine a lot of the people in that match weren't pro wrestlers.
The final 3 were Microman, Nick Gage, and Yoshihiko. Yoshihiko was able to survive the pizza cutter from Gage, but eventually got tossed out of the ring. Gage was eliminated after missing a corner charge and going over the top. And that is that match. So definitely that's your thing. But it's, again, like you said, it's something totally different than what WWE gives you in that weekend. And I think it's okay in that setting for this to exist, because I think in that setting, I think it really works in some way.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think if it's just because it's this really small run organization, it's not on cable television every week. There's a certain expectation, I guess, that's different when you're watching something like DDT or Bloodsport, that you don't look at it the same way as you look at your major promotions.
Yeah, I think as long as you keep it in that atmosphere, I think it works. Rachel, final thoughts on WrestleMania weekend? Finally going to start slowing down from a wrestling standpoint, but everything we took in over like a 5 or 6 day period, final thoughts on that?
It was a lot of wrestling, more than I think I've ever watched in any weekend, but it was just such a solid weekend. I mean, WrestleMania was probably my favorite of the whole weekend. And we move on to Backlash.
Yeah, Backlash will be coming up in just a few weeks. Mike, your final thoughts on everything that was WrestleMania weekend?
Yeah, much like Rachel said, a lot of wrestling. And honestly, the value that you get from Triller TV Plus, especially during WrestleMania weekend for $7.99 a month, is just, it's absurd. I definitely think if you're into wrestling at all, you need to check it out just to see what else is out there.
I think if you're somebody that goes to one of these big PLE weekends, I think it behooves you to catch some of these indie shows as well, because I think it's just going to be a totally different experience. But a good way to support independent wrestling, because independent wrestling does need to survive. And despite Tony Khan signing most of the independent wrestlers, independent wrestling is still alive and well. And so that's great to see. That's going to wrap things up for this week's edition of the Nerdcast Empire. We're going to take a break from wrestling next week. We're going to talk anime, and specifically anime opening themes, with our favorite anime opening themes of all time, to kind of celebrate episode 50 of the Nerdcast Empire. Don't forget, coming up tomorrow, we have Music Mondays with the music from March the 29th. And then in a couple weeks, we're going to be debuting our new anime show on Thursday nights. So make sure you look forward to that. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up, a lot of content coming up over the next few weeks. So certainly check us out at the Nerdcast Empire. Don't forget to check out Stove Lake Media as well. Big thanks to them for their continued support of the Nerdcast Empire. We'll be back again tomorrow with Music Mondays here on the Nerdcast Empire. That's going to wrap things up for this week. For everybody here in the studio, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.